This crazy guy sits here and tells me, hey, I went to Guadalcanal. That's really cool. I'm like, damn it, I'm right. I want to go to Guadalcanal. But I'm going to go to Falklands. You want to come with me? And he said,
sure. That sounds like fun. Why not?
and then-
Yari, you want to go to the Falklands?
Yeah, sure.
You're probably asking yourself, why would you go on a hiking expedition to some remote South American islands in the middle of nowhere? Great question. And it's all the fault of this. Yeah, that's right. 12-year-old Les did really good on a history report and was sent to the school library to do some extra credit on a current event. And that magazine cover was there. And when you see the words, "The Empire Strikes Back," and you're 12 years old, and Return of the Jedi hasn't even come out yet, that's pretty powerful stuff. Needless to say, the hook was set. So I followed it as best I could on the news at the time, and then came a hurricane, because I lived in the Florida Keys at that time. And the power went out, the TV went out, and on my dad's shortwave, the only thing we could get was the BBC telling us about the attacks on the hills around Stanley. So I couldn't find out what was going on in my island. I couldn't find out what was happening in Miami, but I knew exactly what was going on down here. And believe it later or not, when I got in the Marine Corps as a logistician, I had to study this campaign, the logistics of this campaign. And that is how I ended up in Port San Carlos, Falklands, with Ian from Forgotten Weapons and Yari from Varos Staleka. Finally, bringing everything into one picture, walking the land that I had read about in so many books and studied so much earlier in life. And when we got here to Port San Carlos, the first thing that struck me was port. That's a kind of a broad term. I think it means if there's a jetty for a boat to tie it up, you can be a port. Because it's not that big. And it kind of belies what was said in Hugh McManor's book, Falkland Commando, when he was overlooking Port San Carlos as a forward observer, saying he could see into the town and see these streetlights on. I can assure you, there is no town per se, and there are definitely no streetlights. As we walked around Port San Carlos, we took in the history. There's a lot still there. We found some bunkers where either the British or the Argentines had built, we're not sure which, and we found some expended law tubes and other various forms of detritus still in the area from the initial landings back in May of 1982. We also found a memorial. All right, over my shoulder in the distance, there is a memorial to some aircrew of the Royal Marines that got shot down. We're here at Port San Carlos. We're just east of the Port San Carlos settlement. And on that settlement, 3 pairs came in to the west of the settlement and set up. Argentine forces were on this hill. Right here at this bend in the water, 2 Gazelle helicopters came in low, scouting the area. The Argentines took them under fire, knocking both helicopters out of the sky into the water. And then the most horrible thing in the world happened. The crews survived the crash. And then the Argentines gunned them down while still in the water. At that point, the Paras on the other side of San Carlos saw exactly what had happened. They came in pursuit of the Argentines, continuing off to the east, which keep going east, you get to Stanley. And at some point, they had to give up the pursuit, and they were brought back to establish the defense of Port San Carlos by one of Fearless's landing craft. One of the very cool things about Port San Carlos is you're living in history. So we stayed in this very cool, what they called self-catering cottage, we would call an Airbnb. This was most likely the building used by the Mountain Arctic Warfare Cadre as their headquarters in Port San Carlos, where they planned their operations. So that being the case, we found it only fitting that we plan our operations here as well.
At Port San Carlos, we had a guide, Penguin Travel, here on the Falklands, who delivered us very helpfully over here to a guest cabin where we're staying tonight. And tomorrow morning, we set out on our great YOMP. So what is the YOMP? It is the path that 45 Commando took from their landing, well, sort of out there, back over there, to the town of Port Stanley. Yari, you have set us up with a fantastic map here of like the entirety of East Falkland.
Yeah.
We've got our route laid out, And we are starting right over here.
Yeah, and the first leg will take us to Douglas.
Okay, and we're basically taking the same route that 45 Commando took. Now, when they did it, there were no roads out here. There were just basically sheep paths. In the late 80s and early 90s, they started putting in a much more extensive road network on East Falklands. So the route that the Commandos took is basically the road today.
Yeah, it's kind of follows the path of least resistance, kind of what we have heard from the locals and who were part of the campaign. The road is more or less, with few exceptions, the route. It's a gravel road, pretty harsh, so we're not getting too much relief from that. And just to kind of give a picture that what we are facing, that there's a lot of sheep pens on the area, and kind of getting over the barbed wires and disturbing the animals. We don't want to do that and trespassing too much on the land, even though we're very welcome here. So the road it is.
Yeah, it's interesting. All of the property on Falkland Islands is privately owned. So everything that we're traversing here is private farmland, and we have permission to cross it, but there's no better way to make enemies out of local farmers than to go breaking fences. So So we'll be sticking with the road.
Yeah, and it's something like 40-45 kilometers. Haven't measured it fully. What's interesting when looking this map, you don't obviously see it in detail, but the contours, there are a lot of those, and they are like really back together. So when I look the route, we're gonna sweat.
Yes, if you look at pictures of this place, it looks like it's just flat with these very slight rolling hills. But when you're actually walking those hills, a lot of them are a lot steeper and a lot higher than you would expect.
Right, here at Port San Carlos, a pretty important part of the invasion, but the most important part is what you see right there over my shoulder, a place called Fanning Head. That overlooks the entrance to Falkland Sound and the entrance into San Carlos water. And that became a critical piece of territory that the British had to have control of. The Argentines had moved in a reinforced heavy weapons company, and so the SBS was tasked with clearing out Fanning Head to enable the ships to come into the harbor unobstructed. Now, they first did that to locate the enemy by sending helicopter flights over with one of the very first uses of thermal imagery in warfare. And using the thermal images, they located where the Argentines were at, and then sent in a heavy SBS raiding party to act as a battalion-sized diversion and to clear out Fanning Head so the Argentines would not be able to interfere with the invasion. And with that, we left Port San Carlos on our first leg to Douglas. The YOMP had begun.
All right, we are off. We are heading out of Port San Carlos for first leg, which is about 35, probably more like 40, 45 kilometers. And we get to start with a big old hike up the hill out of San Carlos settlement. As I think I'm going to be repeating over the course of this YOMP, the photographs make this look like very gently rolling terrain. In reality, those hills are a lot steeper, a lot more abrupt and taller than you would necessarily expect. So we got ourselves a good initial stress test and we'll see how it goes.
All right, we've completed our first stop on our way to Douglas. We've got a long way to go, so let's get started.
All right, we are just over an hour in and we have cleared up away from San Carlos water. And we are now heading overland with a cheerful Yari at the lead there.
All right, we are on the road from Port San Carlos to Douglas. We're at one of our rest stops. We've been moving about an hour and resting 10 minutes, doing foot checks, grabbing snacks and stuff like that. So far, we've been staying on the road. There's no reason for us to go off of it. Unlike the Commandos back in '82, had to walk across this horrible landscape of gorse and heather and all this other stuff that could break your ankle just by looking at it hard. We're staying on the road to prevent injury, but we are definitely following the course that they went. The road is actually the course they took. They paved over it and made it a transportation network. And here's some of the ground commandos actually walked across.
So we're on our second break, and I'm thinking it would be good to explain our plan of movement. So we do what most of the militaries do, that we have some fixed time for a movement, and then there is a forced break. Our system here is now 1 hour movement and then 10 minutes break, because we're not on a clock, and this is a recreational trip. But the idea is that with the constant movement time, we keep track of how do we make progress, and then when we have the forced breaks, we can do the check for the feed, fix our gear, and make sure that we don't generate any problems which will be costly several days later. And so far going has been good. We have gone through, where's my GPS? Roughly a bit less than 10 kilometers. The terrain is pretty demanding because it's constant up and down the hills, but yeah, we are roughly kind of on 1/4 of the trip, and see you later.
And then it was time to get back on the road to Douglas. However, we did have some fun along the way.
So we're doing this as a quasi-military march, which makes me wonder, Les, where's your rifle?
Oh, fuck! We gotta go back.
All right, Les, so we are doing this in the summer. When the war actually took place, it was wintertime. For us, the temperature is in the low 40s. Low 40s. You can see it's rather gray. We're getting just intermittent light drizzle. But when the commandos did this, it was winter. It was colder, although not hugely colder.
About 10 degrees. They seem to hover around freezing most of the campaign.
Yes, like the worst possible temperature.
Yes, perfect hypothermic weather.
Also with a lot of rain. And we have the benefit of doing this on the road that they've basically since built on the path of the YOMP. But let me give you an idea of what the commandos were hiking over. They had this sort of lumpy, full of invisible holes through the grass, soggy, and soggy was also very relevant because they had not so great British Army boots that were really not meant for wet weather, and they are traversing bogs and things like this and getting their boots quite sodden wet in the mid-30s temperatures, and then walking across this lovely stuff. All right, so we don't have to deal with traversing through all of the holes and hillocks and little baby head in the gorse, but we do have cattle guards here that the islanders have put up, sheep farms have put up. Yari has just cheated by walking around it, which makes sense because this is probably the most dangerous element for us. It would be extremely easy to slip, drop a foot in there, and break an ankle. So we're being really careful walking around them. And in fact, I'm just gonna walk around this one.
All right, well, you've heard us refer to this as a YOMP several times. What does YOMP mean? It's actually an acronym. It stands for Your Own Marching Pace.
Which is notably slower than Yari's marching pace.
Yari is doing what's called a TAB, or a Tactical Advanced Battle.
And both of these terms were used by the troops out here.
Yeah, YOMP was used by the Royal Marine Commandos, and TAB is exclusively used by the Paras.
And we have just a bit more of it to do. Well, the wind has come up, the rain has gone away, and the sun has actually come out. Let's see, it's up there somewhere. And that feels really nice. We stopped and had a bit of a lunch break, which I probably should have filmed, but didn't. Yari has freeze-dried, some brand of very tasty looking freeze-dried finished pulled pork. And Les and I are having MREs. Later, teaser for you. The FIDF guys gave us a couple of British 24-hour ration packs. And we will be trying one of those out for dinner one of these nights. So I think we're at about the halfway point of today's leg out to Douglas. Rear view from the front of Yari. Well, the rain has come back, although it's fairly light at this point. And I think we're actually sort of getting close. We have 10 or 12 kilometers still to go, which feels like success. We'll see what's up over the top of this next hill, aside from the usual, which is more road and more hills.
Based on the books and everything, like one thing I wonder is that when the commando did the movement, why didn't they Argentinians strafe them with pucaras and whatnot? Was it just that they don't have a night flight capability, or was it there's something else?
Well, they definitely did not have a night flight capability. Is the Pucara is a light attack trainer. However, the SAS had done a big raid over on Pebble Island a few weeks earlier. That took out a big chunk of the Pucara force that could have been deployed. Additionally, while the commandos and the paras are moving out to Douglas and Teal, a second para is attacking Goose Green. So that would have been the priority mission for the Argentinians. And there's no evidence that they knew that 45 Commando was moving on Douglas, because the SAS, SBS, Mountain and Arctic Warfare Cadre had a lot of screening patrols out, and they were causing the RGs a lot of problems a bit to our east. So they're really on the priority list for the RGs. It was probably as low as it could be, even if they wanted and had the ability to attack it.
All right, we should probably take a moment to actually explain why this march had to happen. Because, well, the British, why would the British sit on one side of the island and then attack on the other? Well, the original plan was, essentially, San Carlos was chosen as the landing site because it met a bunch of the criteria required for the British operation. It was, in particular, it was a harbor that was basically immune to the Exocet missile threat because it was protected by hills all around, relatively short approaches, so it was vulnerable to Argentine air attack, but not with Exocet missiles. And the British figured they could set up Rapier surface-to-air missile batteries to give protection for the fleet in harbor in San Carlos. It was far enough away from Stanley, there were no Argentine troops around in significant numbers. So that was the chosen landing site. Then the plan was they would heavy lift the troops and their equipment over towards Stanley. Once air superiority had been established, they had a bunch of Chinook helicopters coming over on the Atlantic conveyor. Now, the problem happened when they landed all the troops. Subsequently, the Atlantic conveyor got hit by a pair of Exocets itself, caught fire, and eventually sank, taking with it, I believe, all but one of the British Chinooks. And that left them without the heavy lift capacity to move 3 Commando, or 45 Commando, really anyone, over this northern approach. The other part of this plan eventually built into having troops approach from the north and from the south to present sort of a pincer envelopment on Stanley. So, 45 Commando gets the order to pack up and march themselves overland from San Carlos on the far west side of the island to positions outside Stanley around Mount Kent on the far east side of the island. That's why they ended up doing this. Now, the next question you might ask is, why didn't the Argentines do anything like this? If the British can hike this thing, if the three of us can hike this thing without a whole bunch of, well, why couldn't the Argentines be mobile enough to respond to this sort of thing? And the answer is a combination of weather and terrain. The ground over there that we are not hiking on is substantially more difficult to walk than the road, which has been since constructed. But it comes down to largely a combination of troop training and troop fitness and the amount of gear that has to go with them. So for the Argentines to move, for anyone to move, involved taking a bunch of heavy support weapons, a tremendous amount of ammunition, and that is really what made the Great Yomp such an incredibly difficult and impressive affair, was the fact that they were bringing along machine gun ammo, mortar ammo, Milan missiles. They still were in a position to have very limited fire support when they did eventually attack, because as much as these guys were carrying, they were not carrying 105mm artillery ammunition with them, nor were they dragging field howitzers. But that's why the British were able to do it. The Argentines weren't so much. Alright, we are getting kind of close. We can actually see our first destination here, so I'll check back in with you in another few minutes. There it is, way out there. That is Douglas Settlement. See, can we zoom in and see it? Yeah, just barely. Way out there in the distance. So that is our goal for this first leg. So we're actually getting close. We've survived it so far. There it is, Douglas. Chance to take our boots off and set our packs down. It got a little windy this afternoon.
The sign is a lie. It may be 3 miles to Douglas, but the driveway of the farm we were going to was at least 3 miles long. Once we arrived at Douglas, we decided to have a meal of the great British DPRs we were given by the Falkland Islands Defense Force. We've opened our British Daily Patrol ration, and it's enough food to feed one soldier for a day. Being that Yari, Ian, and I are here, we're going to use this as our one meal for dinner tonight here at Douglas Settlement in the Falkland Islands. We have some fortified energy drink, a couple different flavors, or 3 different flavors. We have an apricot oat biscuit. We have some peanut butter. We have some more Tutti Frutti powder. We have some hot cocoa. We have something called cola bottles.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what that is.
We have just nuts. We have chocolate marble cake. We have instant porridge. We have beef burrito filling with rice. And we have Hunter's chicken.
So basically we got porridge for breakfast, and then a lunch and a dinner entree, a bunch of drinks, and then some snacks. Yeah, that seems like a nice setup.
Some kind of condiments. Kitchen condiments. A spork. And something, and looks like sweeteners.
There's some instant coffee in there.
Coffees and sweeteners and stuff, I believe. I'm
All right.
tired and can't read the small print.
All right, let's divvy this up and try some food out. All right, Yari, you have the pasta bolognese. We opened a second one of these to have more food.
Yeah.
And how is it?
I'm actually so hungry that I just want food, but in this condition, it's really delicious. And I even put it some cheddar spread to top it off. But In these conditions, it's delicious.
We're maybe not in a condition to properly, like, objectively evaluate these.
Now, I argue that sentiment.
Okay.
I have Hunter's chicken. I've had a few bites here, and it's quite good. I also added the cheddar cheese at Yari's insistence, and that was a great idea. I have had a lot of U.S. MREs in my lifetime, and I'm already a fan of what the Brits are doing.
Okay. And I have the very, very orange sweet and sour chicken, which is not great, but not terrible. And like Yari, I am very, very hungry and scarfing this thing down.
And so this concludes day one of our recreation of the YOMP by 4-5 Commando of the Falklands War of 1982. Please comment, like, and subscribe, and tune in next week for the next installment of our great YOMP.